Hey, Fearless Schools family. That's right. Just by listening in and checking out this podcast, you've become part of a big old educational family. Are you the uncle, the auntie, the brother, grandpa, the long lost wayward cousin? Well, I'll tell you what, you do you and decide that part, and we'll do what we do, right? And that is this, of course, we're going to bring everyone the best in pedagogical and educational leadership podcasting on the whole dang planet. That's right. Sound like a deal? Deal. We'll shake on that. Okay. Well, listen, it is that time, dear listeners, for another shimmering episode of your Fearless Schools podcast brought to you by the educational super chefs known as Creative Leadership Solutions. Check them out at creativeleadership.net and you'll be both amazed and awestruck. It's true. And if I forgot to mention it at the top of the broadcast, it's me, Dr. Drew Tomlin, current middle school principal with over 30 plus years experience in the schoolhouse as your host and podcast concierge. Happy to be here as always, and I'm elated as always to be joined by the always, let's keep on using the word always, awesome Director of Professional Learning for CLS, Dr. Ann McCarty. How's it going, Dr. Ann?
As always, Drew,
Mm-hmm.
we're here with what I would consider not just a colleague, but a friend, an amazing school counselor, author, speaker, like funny storyteller, name it, she's got it. Like, I cannot wait for audience to hear a whole different set of strategies today.
Awesome. And funny storyteller too. No pressure on that. So if the special guest, tells a story and it just goes flat, well then, there you go. But no, I'm sure that this guest is going to fly, high with all of it. Okay, so listen, let's learn some more. Today's guest on the Fearless Schools podcast brings a wealth of experience and expertise to our ears, our hearts, and our minds. And we're excited that she's here and we're all engaged in the learning today. So we're going to learn about her. Here it is. So Today's guest is the author of Middle School Matters and Middle School Superpowers. She's also a licensed clinical counselor in private practice and a consulting school counselor in Maryland. She freelances for many national publications, including some small startups, the Washington Post and CNN, and her ideas have been shared in a wide variety of media outlets, including NPR, the New York Times, and the Atlantic. Listen, beyond the stuff in the bio, she's proud to be the co-founder of the Social Skills Playbook, an app designed to teach kids social and interviewing skills. She co-hosts AMLE's Walk and Talk podcast for educators and speaks and consults nationally and internationally about a broad range of education and counseling topics. She has 3 kids. Her youngest is graduating from high school this year, and she says, you know what, that's not a personal accomplishment, but being a mom has been her most important role, and now she can add to her resume being a guest on this wee little podcast. That's right, it's Phyllis Fagel. What's going on, Phyllis Fagel?
First of all, your energy is so infectious, and I'm waking up. It's afternoon here in Maryland, but now I feel like I have a little more pep in my step. So thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Well, listen, we appreciate your pep in your step and pride in your stride. So thank you so much, Phyllis, for being here. Listen, we're going to get things cooking, and it's not really something that's cooked, but it's something that's made. Your favorite food, I hear, is ice cream. Why is ice cream the food that you go to in both challenge or triumph?
I think it goes back to when I was a little kid, and that was my father's go-to reward or consolation, no matter what was going on. We won a soccer game, we lost a soccer game. I got good grades, I didn't get good grades. I had any kind of accomplishment or any kind of setback, ice cream was always the answer for my dad. So I think it's a sentimental favorite more
Very
than
nice. Now, was there a certain flavor you went for, or is it just, hey, whatever's on the list?
Rocky Road was always my favorite. Yeah.
Awesome. And I've got to have another follow-up question with that. Are you a cup person, cone person? And if cone, sugar or plain?
I'm definitely more of a cup person, but if I have a cone, it's going to be a waffle cone. If it's the kind where they make it on site, then it's worth getting the cone.
Yeah, no, that's nice to know because, and it's interesting that your flavor is Rocky Road because from your work, what you do, and we'll get obviously more into this, is that you make roads less rocky for both students and families. So I find that to be ironic. And then sometimes people forget that the most important part of the ice cream is the structure that you provide for the ice cream. You know what I mean? So not only are you giving great insights and advice and tips and tricks for all of those stakeholders but you do it in such a way that is, it's structured. So people know like, hey, this is what it's all about. Oh man, already you've inspired us to be deep thinkers. And we're not waffling about that, even though you like the waffle cone.
Any shout out for your favorite ice cream parlor there in the DMV?
Probably, it's funny because every ice cream parlor I like around here goes out of business. So I have to actually think through what still has a storefront. Probably around here, Haagen-Dazs would be the best option. Yeah.
There you go. Haagen-Dazs.
Yes, in Massachusetts, my hometown, I would say Cabot's, which is definitely worth a trip if you end up doing your PD at any point in Boston.
There you go. Again, coupons coming to you, I'm sure, from both of those ice cream confectionaries, right? They're not haberdasheries. Haberdasheries are for hats. There you go. Speaking of hats and what kind of hat you had on as a child, what kind of student were you, and what, and even perhaps who helped you learn beyond just ice cream?
I'm trying to think about a nice way to talk about myself as a student. I think people were a little surprised that I ended up being a good student eventually, because I was a little slow out of the gate. I was a late reader. I was the kid who the teacher would yell at for not tying her shoes, but who wouldn't want to share that she didn't know how to tie her shoes in second grade. And when I got stressed, I kind of shut down a little bit. So I think it was hard for me to ask for help. I was really, really shy. I love to read. I read voraciously. So for a long time, I would pronounce words incorrectly because I had seen them in print before I ever encountered them in conversation. And somehow or other along the way, it did all come together. I was definitely more of an English, social sciences, bio student than say, chemistry, physics, math.
Right.
And I had good students, though, good teachers and role models in different categories, though. I still remember, and I wrote about this in Middle School Matters, I had a 7th grade math teacher, and I ended up in his class when I bombed out of the advanced math that they thought I might be able to handle, and I definitely could not. And I was feeling a little ashamed to be going down a level in math, and showed up in this teacher's classroom. And he had a way of reframing for me everything about how I learned. Instead of me having some strange way of learning, he would say that I always got the right answer, but you never knew what creative way I would come up with to get to that answer, and that he liked the way I thought. And so he really changed my self-identity as a math student that year.
Right, and rewarded you not for your math intelligence, but how you were intelligent at math, but just through a different way. I like hearing words like being creative and like the way you're thinking and things like that. That's really awesome. And I also, it was interesting where you said about being a late reader, but then reading voraciously and kind of rediscovering words. So how does all of that, the math teacher who kind of reframed learning for you, and you finding your voice in some ways as a reader later, how does that impact your work now and the work that you do with kids and families as they navigate some of those same turbulent learning lessons?
So that's a really good question. And I think that I instinctively was drawn to reading and writing because I love storytelling. And I think that the work I do requires a level of empathy and insight that you really can only acquire through activities, including reading, where you're adopting someone else's perspective. And so I think that is probably the biggest application for how reading back then has impacted what I do now. There were some stops along the way, and I always tell my students this too. I didn't start out as a counselor. I started out as a journalist, and I had to try a few different things to figure out where my strengths and interests intersected. And I think growing up, I felt like this was a failing in some way, that everyone else seemed to have it together. They all knew what they wanted to be when they grew up. I had all these examples in my life of people who chose field and stuck with it, or even stayed at the same company for decades. And I was flitting around, and I think it took me until I was well into parenthood myself to appreciate how lucky I was to be able to try lots of different things and how it's just the way I'm wired and not necessarily a failing.
Yeah. No. Storytelling is something that you're drawn to. And storytelling isn't just fiction, but storytelling as a nonfiction, and obviously that journalistic mind that goes along with that. Is there any specific book that you remember or that you, from your early days as a student, you're like, oh, that's the book that I always remember? Just curious.
From being a little.
Yeah. Why not? Let's go there.
Gosh, well, when I was in second grade, I completely plagiarized The Velveteen Rabbit and passed it off. So that's pretty much the highest compliment you could give.
Yeah.
Later, I liked a lot of the series books. I liked All of That Kind Family. I liked very dramatic, multi-generational, very family-centered kinds of stories that allowed me to see different ways of life in different people's houses.
That's cool.
So,
it's interesting when you mentioned also about like sometimes we feel guilty for not or feel not as successful as other people because we might change jobs, might change our thoughts about a career and stuff like that. And I think we need to debunk that myth of permanence as success. Do you agree? I mean, do you think that's the case too, that people suffer from that?
I do. I think that probably the current generation, my students now, feel very differently than I did because they're growing up in a gig economy. They're growing up with the advent of AI. And I think they recognize in a way that we didn't how important it is to be able to, I'll borrow like a COVID term and say pivot, but just the ability to be flexible and to be able to apply whatever skills you have to a different field at a moment's notice. I think that's something this generation has to acquire.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. And working with them on a daily basis, there are a lot of skills that they need to acquire that they don't even realize that they need yet. And we'll get into AI. I want to dip into those waters in a little bit. Middle school in particular, obviously you mentioned a seventh grade teacher who had a significant impact on you. Why are middle school and young adolescents such passionate spaces for you?
So when I started out thinking about middle school, working in middle school, writing about middle school, it wasn't actually because I was passionate about it. I was in elementary schools and high schools before I ended up in a middle school. And to be completely honest, I took that job because I had young children. It was part-time and it was walking distance from my house.
Yeah.
So I did not go into it thinking, you know what, middle school is my jam. And when I started in a middle school, at the same time, I had 2 middle schoolers in my house.
Ooh.
And I had parents coming to me with all kinds of questions. I had teachers who were personalizing their interactions with students. I had students who were freaking out about things that were making them freak out, that they were freaked out because they didn't understand why it felt like such a big deal when intellectually they knew it wasn't a big deal. And I wanted to be able to support all of these different constituencies, but I didn't know what I was doing either, which was problematic. And so I decided to do what I started out this conversation by saying I did a lot of, which is to go and read everything I could. Only for middle school, nothing existed. There was so little out there. And because I had that journalism background and because I wanted to learn for myself, for my own sense of competency in my job and in my own house, I started writing. That's when I started writing the column for Washington Post, which ultimately became my first book. But along the way, I did develop a passion for this age group. And I think it's because of something one of my colleagues once said that really stuck with me. She calls middle school the last best chance. And I think there's so much wisdom in that because they can be 13 going on 3 or 13 going on 30, depending on the day. They have such a sense of whimsy and creativity, and they're funny when they get it right. Sometimes it doesn't land right. Sometimes it feels a little mean, but as long as you don't take it too seriously, you can have a lot of fun with middle schoolers, and you can have a big influence because they care so much about what you think and how you feel about them. So I see it as this incredible opportunity that we need to encourage educators, parents to really seize and take advantage of.
Yeah. No,
I want to pull together 2 things here, Drew.
Yeah.
Phyllis, middle school being the last best chance, I think is what you said, right? And your teacher, I think, was a 7th grade math teacher who reframed your learning, gave you that last best chance, so to speak. Talk about and give our listeners, what were the specific things that teacher did, or how did that teacher reframe your experience to turn learning around for you? So like some actionable steps for our listeners if they are that math teacher and they are the last best chance for a middle school student.
That's a great question. And I would say it's the artful reframe. I think taking a strengths-based approach rather than a deficit-focused approach with middle schoolers is key. Same with, as a parent, as anybody who's working with kids in this age group, they're so sensitive, they're so insecure, they have no perspective, so they have no way of knowing if their inability to do something today is, predictive of what they'll be able to do in the future. And so just being able to take a look at that whole picture in front of you, that collection of, clumsiness and skills and developing skills, and find something in that mess that seems promising. And if you can't, find a way to artfully reframe it in a very optimistic, positive, strengths-oriented way. I think that is how you elicit the best from a middle schooler. And that's what that middle school teacher did. And he was able to pull it off because it felt authentic to me. It didn't feel like he was making it up. And I think part of the reason it felt authentic is because he shared that. I actually heard that secondhand from my parents. He shared it with them in a parent-teacher conference. And something about him reframing it for them and making them see it differently and then share that with me. I was not just getting it from the teacher, I was also getting it from my parents. And it was that combination that I think helped so much.
Thank you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, and you've talked about essential practices that teachers can have, like you said, artful reframing, strength-based approach, kind of seeing in the whole child, the whole picture, and yes, kind of acknowledging the messiness, but finding the good stuff within that messiness and being authentic, I think, to kind of boil it all back down. So that's, obviously the classroom teacher's work. Is there any essential practices that you would say, hey, listen, educational administrators, right? Principals, assistant principals, people, maybe even at the district level, what can they do as they work with families in the middle grades and beyond to help out kids in this space?
So some of it is the same. Yeah. Some of it is really seeing the positive attributes in teachers and students and families. And then, I kind of see the administrators as the mom and dad of this, mom or dad, or mom and dad, depending on how many administrators there are in the building, and they set the tone. And being able to normalize for families, to create a common language, to talk to them, whether it's through, dropping coffees or through book clubs or through newsletters or through bringing in outside speakers to help them know what to expect and to be reassuring, to be optimistic, to partner with them and let them know that you see them as an asset, that you want them in the building, that you're going to find ways to get them in the building that work with their schedule, that meet them on their terms, whether that's, a different language or whatever might be going on with that family, just to convey that you care, but that mostly you care about their kid, and just being proactive so that if there is a situation where a kid is maybe not meeting expectations, whether that's behaviorally or academically, it doesn't come as a shock. You've been communicating the whole time along the way.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You made me think about a previous podcast that we've done about FACE, family and community engagement, and how important it is to have a two-way street when it comes to working with families. How important is it in your work in particular to be a good listener to families as well as providing them helpful feedback?
So I think if you don't listen, you have no idea what you're not going to come up with the right solution to the problem. You may not even have the right problem. And so I think that's something that we can end up tripping up over ourselves, whether we're a counselor or a teacher, an administrator, where we decide what the issue is. We decide that they're having a panic attack because of X reason, Or we think that the reason they're disorganized is because they're going back and forth between two households during a divorce. And it's not necessarily that we're completely off base, but we may not have the full picture. We may be wrong. And if we're not listening to parents, if we're not listening to families and getting that whole picture, we're not going to be able to come up with that solution or at least some kind of a fix for that issue going on.
Right. You might come up with a solution, but it's not necessarily the solution that they want, right? Like you might dish out some Rocky Road, but what they really want is some buttered pecan and they want it in a cup, but you have nothing but sugar cones.
But that reminds me of a time I was dealing with a seventh grader who was panicking about having to give a presentation in front of the class, which is a pretty common fear for kids to have. And I wanted them to try something, even if they didn't do it exactly as the teacher had expected them to do that presentation. I wanted them to take some kind of a risk. So I asked them what they might feel comfortable doing. And at first I started to suggest ideas. Do you want to read it rather than memorize it? Do you want to do it without being videotaped? And they looked at me and they said, the one thing I never, ever would have suggested, because it would have been a horrible solution for me personally. But they said, you know what? I think I can do it if I give the talk with my back to the class so that they couldn't see anybody. Yeah. And so in the same way that we have to have kids come up with the right solutions, I think sometimes parents are going to come up with a far better solution than we ever will for their student. They're the ones living with them.
What comes across your desk that if we could give to our audience to say, here's the things that Phyllis sees, but don't fall for it. It's actually something else.
So the biggest, I would say misdiagnosis, not technically diagnosis, but the most common misconception is that a kid is struggling with anxiety or depression. And what it actually is a skills deficit, an inability maybe to connect with peers, or they're overwhelmed by the heightened workload as they go through the school years and they need more support with executive functioning, or they just have no ability to cope. They don't have any strategies. And if they just had the right strategy, they could actually manage whatever those situational issues are. So I think if anything, we tend to go, and it's funny saying that as a therapist, but as a therapist, I think we tend to go straight to mental health conditions faster than we need to.
Okay, Phyllis. So speaking of the social conversations, I had the pleasure of seeing you at the AMLE annual conference, and you were presenting your social skills playbook, the AI, which you were showing us how to help middle school students enter those conversations. So talk to us about AI, talk to us about the platform, tell us all the things that we need to know about Social Playbook.
Yeah, I mean, AI is such a massive, massive topic, and I'm not a technological person. So the last thing I thought I would be partnering with someone on is an AI app. However, as I was saying earlier about the misconception that kids are struggling with anxiety or depression when they're actually struggling with skills deficits, particularly social skills deficits, I decided that we needed to do something that actually meets kids where they are. And AI can be scary because you hear the horror stories, you do not know what kids are getting online. And so we wanted to do a curated AI so that kids were only accessing content that we have decided that they could access. And the way it works is that there's an AI social skills coach, and kids can rehearse different situations. Teachers can use it for role plays. Parents can use it as well. I had a parent who used it to figure out what they should say to their own child. So there's lots of different applications. Right now, we're focusing primarily on helping kids learn interviewing skills, whether it's for a babysitting job or a summer job or college admissions or even a job later. That is a skill that I have seen that kids are really lacking in. Everything from how to elaborate on a question to how to show that you're interested in a particular job or opportunity. And so the social skills coach is just a way for kids to do it with the anonymity, with the privacy in their own home. And especially for middle schoolers who are going to feel more acutely self-conscious than kids at other ages, if they're not willing to even take a small social risk, if they're not willing to invite somebody over or text somebody, it's a way for them to practice or rehearse what they might say in advance. Because if you feel the emotions in advance, you actually can manage them better when you're in the real situation.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Goodness gracious, I wish I had that when I was a kid.
It's free too. For anyone listening, it's free. It's socialskills.app. Anybody can go on and try it and see if it helps. That's why we did it.
Yeah. So what have you found thus far? I mean, especially those, like being able to practice and go through those scenarios and interviewing skills. What successes have you found already from people using the app?
So I'll give you an example, actually, because I use it in my own practice. I use it in my private practice and I use it in the school setting. And so I'll give you an example from each. In the school setting, we had a scenario, and to make it not personal, it was actually not involving the kids who were trying out the app. But it was a situation where a student didn't know how to tell another student that they didn't want to sit with them for lunch every single day. They liked them, they wanted to be their friend, but sometimes they wanted to branch out. And it's really hard to be assertive like that. It's hard to figure out that line between, creating some boundaries, but being kind. And this was a child who didn't want to be unkind. They just really wanted to talk to other people too. They have very limited times during the day where they can have conversations that are unstructured. And so the way I use the app is we did a role play. First, I had two kids in real life come up and act that out. And one said, can we sit together at lunch? And the other one said, again, and kind of didn't elaborate. And then it sort of ended because they didn't have the vocabulary or the social skills to really hash it out. So then I had one of them sit back down, and I had the social skills coach play the other part. And when they played it with a real student and the social skills coach actually pried a little more deeply into what was going on. So when he said, "Can I sit with you?" the social skills coach said, "Oh, how come you always want to sit with me?" Just a simple question, which is deceptively simple social skill. And at that point, the other kid, who I think was identifying in actuality with this scenario, said, "Well, I feel kind of awkward, and I know you'll always, include me, and I don't know if the other students really want me to sit with them, and so I just feel more comfortable sitting with you," which actually elicited empathy from the student, who was able to then, having heard that, say, "Oh, well, I know everyone likes you. If you want, I can help you get to know this person or that person a little better, so you're more comfortable." So they could actually delve a little deeper into what was underneath that frustrating social situation and solve it.
Yeah. So obviously AI, I think, sometimes gets a bad name as it's going to supplant instead of supplement. It's going to replace instead of, and it should be a tool for critical thinking and for learning. And this is the perfect example, right? It didn't replace what the students had to do. It just kind of was a rope ladder across a divide in some ways. Yeah.
And at a time when kids' empathy is still developing and they have a lot of trouble putting themselves in someone else's shoes. My favorite, example is, a sixth grade kid who's really offended that her classmate didn't invite her to a birthday party. But when you delve into it a little deeper, you find out that she didn't invite that kid to her birthday party. That's where I think it can be a helpful tool. The other example from my private practice was somebody who, and this was an older student. And I think the other issue we sometimes have as adults is that we discount how long it takes to acquire these skills. We have adults who are still struggling with some of these skills and, feel awkward or won't put themselves in a difficult situation because they feel awkward. And so this was a college student who wanted to get to know somebody in her bio class better. And she just wanted to sit with her. She had met her in some other context. So she had an opening, but it felt really weird to just go up and sit down and start talking to her. And so she practiced with the app and had that conversational partner and the feedback in real time, which it gives, and then felt more courageous and was able to have that conversation and sit next to him.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And I think too that the other part that I think is important with all of this work is that it's happening now. Like, I think, you know, with the example that you gave about a sixth grader being upset about not being invited to a party, some parents and some families might trivialize that. Oh, it's just a party. You're in sixth grade. You'll get over it, kid. But if we don't have them work through that and do so with a tool like this, then they could become adults who are struggling with those same issues later on. You know what I mean? Like doing this restorative work and having these critical conversations now is so essential when kids are 11, 12, 13, figuring all this relationship stuff out. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh I mean, confidence comes from competence. So you practice the skills. It doesn't happen through osmosis. There's, you know, I always say there's always one unicorn eighth grader who's like super organized. It's usually a female student. There's always one unicorn kid who's super confident and always inviting everyone over to their house. But they're unicorns for a reason, because the vast majority of them feel really self-conscious and insecure and are very risk averse when it comes to the social stuff.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you said, Phyllis, when you were speaking, and it's just for our listeners too, I want to reiterate that oftentimes the young adolescents, young adults, even adults know something is off and they know they want to address it. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
They don't even know how to start the conversation. And so what I hear you saying now is figure out how to enter the conversation. And if you don't know how to enter the conversation, you can use the AI to help you enter that conversation and find a solution. Am I right?
Yes. And, you know, for all of the downsides of AI, cheating, you know, replacing human beings, whatever, you know, you hear in the doom and gloom scenarios, I think it's important to at least try to find ways that we can use it to kids' advantage and to our own advantage in ways that promote growth, promote skill development.
Yeah. No, it's true. I can't tell you how many times I've had kids in my office trying to work through a situation, but they're like, I just wanted to find out if so-and-so actually said something about me. But they tried to do it in the cafeteria or in the hallway or in the middle of class, and it turned into a big old messy mess. So it's like taking the time to do it with, I always remind them, it's about timing and tone. Timing and tone. Like, when are you going to say it? How are you going to say it? Let's figure that out. So it's cool that this tool is out there to unmess their messiness, because middle school kids can mess some stuff up.
And yes, sometimes we can't save them from themselves, but we can try.
Hey, speaking of saving folks, right? So, you know, as all super heroes do, you are a superhero in the space that you're in. Just own that, all right? So you have a cape and you fly around and you help out people. What would you say are the superpowers that you have that help you do that kind of work? What are your superpowers? And then on the other side of that coin, well, I'll ask the other question after the first one.
Well, I might end up preempting the question, and you might hear from my dog, who's had enough of me talking to other people. But I would say that whatever your biggest strength is also your biggest weakness. You know, it's the flip side of the same coin. And I think that's true for me as well. So probably I'm going with this only because you told me I have to own a superpower. That's not really my nature to say that. But I would say that I always see the good in people. And I will, you know, my family members make fun of me because no matter how egregious someone behaves, I always have like well, maybe.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not even a reframe. I really believe that.
Yeah.
Really. And so I think that is I think kids probably sense that. I genuinely like them. And so that's probably my greatest strength in this space. It's also my greatest weakness in some ways because I I feel things so deeply and I'm so sensitive and I have a hard time, setting that aside sometimes. And it can interfere with your productivity. I have to be probably more careful than most people about online usage because I was watching the Olympics and they had a million animal cruelty ads. I don't know if your station had them as well, but it would throw me every single time to see the suffering animal. Yeah. So the big strength is also the weakness.
No, listen, and that makes a lot of sense because I was going to ask about your kryptonite, and so your empathy and your ability to have such deep compassion can either be an asset or something else altogether. So, yeah, thanks for working through that with us. Maybe do you ever seek out AI to help yourself?
Yeah, I think we all need all the help we can get, right?
That's right. It's just all about the prompt that you type into it, right? I am a middle school administrator working through. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm an adult, so I reach out mostly to my trusted people and my friends when I have to work through something. And I think with middle schoolers in particular, but probably all kids, it's not intuitive to ask for help. It's not intuitive to know who to ask for help. In our lessons, we talk to students about what is trust. Especially if you're a really empathetic person, you're going to trust people you shouldn't probably trust. And as I tell students, it's fine to share a secret as long as you're okay with everybody knowing that secret. And sometimes you do want everyone to know, maybe you want your crush to find out that you like them, but you have to go into it. Maybe there's somebody who you can legitimately trust, who will keep that confidential, but it's kind of rare. And I think as adults, we've had more practice. We know who we can talk to and we have something that's important to us to discuss.
That is true. So final question for us today, I think, is when you're out there in the world and you're writing articles and doing all that deep research too, is there an educational best practice right now that's raising one eyebrow or maybe raising both eyebrows that you're like, ooh, what's this about?
So this might surprise you because of what I do, but I actually think we might have taken the relationship piece and the warmth piece too far.
Okay, do tell.
I think it's incredibly important that kids have an authentic, caring relationship with the adults who are teaching them and working with them. But I think authenticity also requires some truth telling, and that we are doing kids a disservice if we are not helping them see how they might be getting in their own way. Similarly, I think, and this is something now that I'm at an all boys school, I probably appreciate more than I did in the past, but their job is to push against the boundaries and to see where they are. But they feel really insecure if they don't push up against them. They need to know what the limits are, what the expectations are, whether it's grading or behavioral, and having those boundaries makes them feel safe. And so I think that when we talk about relationships, when we talk about warmth, when we talk about caring and authenticity, it's not at the expense of being honest in a kind way, in a discreet way. You're not going to embarrass them in front of their peers. In a developmentally appropriate way, you're not going to be sarcastic. That will never, ever work. But I might say to a kid, I noticed when they were all talking about how hard the test was, and you kept saying you thought it was really easy, it seemed like they might have been like rolling their eyes a little bit. Did you feel that?
Yeah.
And it's about that skill development, and they can't develop the skills if they don't have that insight. And that requires a bit of hard honesty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if they're telling them, that was mean, just in a very calm, direct,
Yeah. No, you know what? That gives me good reassurance about, sometimes I have those little nuggets of truth that I want to, put that out there to a kid. But sometimes I have to I pause because I'm like, geez, that kid's already having a rough day. I don't want to, add to that. But then I think, well, maybe I should have told that truth in a nice way. There you go.
I think students appreciate it. If you think about indifference being the opposite of
that's true.
love, as opposed to hate being the opposite of love, if you're telling kids the truth, to me, that's the opposite of indifference too. You're saying to them, I care enough about you to really want to help you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, goodness gracious, Phyllis Fagel, thank you for bringing your full-on awesomeness to all of us here on the Fearless Schools podcast. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your day for us.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. Our audience was hungry for a savory knowledge sandwich, and they wanted it with the crust still on, just fully intact, and they're going to bark about it. Not
with a dessert of Rocky Road ice cream.
Exactly. Rocky Road on the side, or maybe in the sandwich. You know what? They just want it authentic. That's all they want. So you brought that and then some. So, hey, thank you so much. Again, Fearless Schools podcast listeners, you know what you did as well. You took time out of your listening lives to check out another Fearless Schools podcast brought to you by Creative Leadership Solutions, and you should be proud of yourself. Pat yourself on the back. Go to www.creativeleadership.net and subscribe and share this podcast with anyone and everybody you know. Go find that AI tool that Phyllis was talking about. Gosh, share it with pals and pen pals and email confidants, friends on the bus, people walking next to the bus, whoever, whenever, and wherever you are. I'm Dr. Drew Tallman, host of your Fearless Schools podcast, wishing you well and saying stay fearless on the bright road ahead. Thanks again, Phyllis.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Thank you.